right, everybody. Yes, seats, please. Right, I'd like to again thank Esri for lunch. That was all very nice, and certainly I appreciated it when I got outside the room here. A couple things before we get started. Actually, one main thing, which is if you have not downloaded the app, I again encourage you to do so. We are also live streaming the event, and you can connect to that on the app. So that's RPAS 2017. On our next session, titled Setting the Scene, we do just that. We look at some current and near-term operations underway that are really helping to provide the vision of what we need to accomplish. Those of us working on the regulatory side, we have an awful lot of work to do, but we need to know what that work needs to actually achieve. So, setting the scene. And we have as our moderator, Mr. Catalin Cotrut, Director of IATA's Audit Program. Mr. Cotrut is an airline pilot and engineer with extensive experience on both industry and regulatory sides. He's been captain in Boeing 737s and A320s, Chief Operating Officer of an airline, and Director General of the Romanian CAA. There have been 2 of those. Mr. Cotrut has seen the aviation industry from many perspectives and has also represented Romania on the Council of ICAO. So, Catalin Cotrut, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know why I have to moderate the panel after the lunch because it's so difficult for you guys. I need to boost you up a little bit here. And this is where I will try my best. So good afternoon again, everybody, for taking your time and commitment in attending the important event, ICAO Second Remotely Piloted Aircraft System, RPAS Symposium. Wonderful day outside in Montreal with a lot of amazing and experienced aviation people from all over the world, addressing future challenges in international safety arena. We have all listened very strong message from Dr. Olumuya Benara-Liu, President of the Council of ICAO, about the strong commitment to lead and support the area of RPAS, followed by 3 states representatives from Italy, US, and Singapore, sharing with us the work in progress they are performing, but also the challenges, and we listen to messages from them, such common regulatory framework, shared commitment to safety, further dedication of resources to ICAO panels, which is music to our ears. After that, we learn from industry representative, Association for Unmanned Vehicle System International, IATA, CANSO, ACI, Aerospace and Defense Industry Association of Europe, their opinion, their contribution, and the way they are moving ahead. Now is the time to set the scene, to set the tone, in having the focus on current near-term operations and training experience from around the world and give the industry perspective of different scenarios. Therefore, I have the pleasure to invite my first speaker, Mr. Zdravko Kolev. He joined Frontex Research and Innovation Unit since August 2007 as seconded national expert from Bulgarian Border Police with rank Chief Border Police Inspector. Since 2010, he became a research officer in the same unit. His experience includes 23 years of service in various positions at the Bulgarian Air Force, Defense, Navy, and Border Police. He holds a master's degree engineer in radar technology. His area of expertise and interest at Frontex is border surveillance, technology assessment, test and demonstration of technology for integrated border management in particular. His area of interest covers also the agency activities related to remotely piloted aircraft system. In 2010, RPAS International presented him with Catherine Fergen Award. Please, Zdravko, please join us and share with us your experience.
Okay. Thank you very much, Catalin. First of all, I would like to big thank you to Leslie inviting us to this really important event, and it's my honor to be here together with you, with all RPAS stakeholders, end users, industry, and regulator, of course, and to have opportunity to present the Frontex views about the remotely piloted aircraft systems. I hope that presentation is already there. So thank you. It's okay. So very briefly about the Frontex. Frontex is a EU agency, executive operational agency with own legal personality. Autonomous budgets, you may have seen you may see the figures that 2016 the budget was 250, increasing to 281 million in 2017, and it expected to reach 222 million in 2020. The agency is governed by the management board composed of the heads of national border guards authorities of EU member states, and also includes a representative from the European Commission. The agency has also its own executive management, executive director and deputy. The agency is operational since 3rd of October 2005. Currently, we reach staff of 418 precisely, and the intention is this staff to be increased more than double to reach a number of 1,000 by 2020. Why all these increases are shown in these slides, I will answer you right now. The agency is operational since 2005, but there is a dramatic change in the mandate of the agency in the end of the last year. So Frontex now became a European Border and Coast Guard Agency, established with a regulation adopted by European Parliament and the Council of Europe. The main change now in the mandate includes Coast Guard functions, European cooperation on Coast Guard functions. The agency will keep the trend and will still keeping main focus on illegal migration. The new mandate will allow agency to address some issues with more power, like migratory challenges, potential future threats, and also, the last but not the least, serious crime within border crime dimension. What is new in the new mandate? The agency is intelligence-driven, but with the new mandate, there will be periodic risk analysis and mandatory vulnerability assessment, aiming to identify and address weak spots. This will be implemented mainly through seconded Frontex liaison officers to the member states under the crisis. On the second place, the agency now will have more power to intervene. What does it mean in practice? Actually, the agency will be empowered to require member states to take timely corrective actions in the crisis area. The agency will have also opportunity to ensure that this action is taken on the ground, and even to deploy own experts or to assist the member states with technical equipment and systems. All this to be achieved with a reserve of resources. There will be a rapid reserve pool of border guards as well as technical equipment pool. We will be put at disposal of the agencies once again when is needed, when the crisis arrived. So with this, maybe I answer the question why the budget is so high and why the staff is going to be increased. More, what new is the new mandate? Up to now, the agency has more coordinating role among the EU member states and Schengen associated countries. Now, with the new mandate, Frontex will have opportunity to launch joint operation with the neighboring countries, including operating in their territory. All this require a liaison officer to be deployed in the neighboring country. The agency is going to play much more stronger and important role in interns by development European return intervention teams composed of escorts, monitors, and return specialists who will work to effectively return illegal staying third country nationals. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, the Frontex, the agency is expected to play more important role together with other international and EU organizations in the fight with organized crime and also prevention of the terrorism. And now jump to the main topic, RPAS. RPAS is a part of wider platform strategy. The surveillance strategy of the agency should include, or already actually is there, answer to the following main questions. What presence is needed? What surveillance is needed? What revised time is needed? This is to be achieved by reaction capability and also deterrence. Surveillance aiming to achieve full situational awareness in the border areas. Surveillance is carried out by patrolling assets. The patrolling assets are facing different challenges since the coordinated or organized by Frontex joint operations are taking place in different areas, maritime, land. And the main task for the patrolling assets is to detect and deter, gather data information, aiming to produce situational awareness in support to identification and tracking of objects of interest, to facilitate a timely response, and also complement and confirm cooperative information. The patrol paradigm is to achieve patrol assets deployment based on risk and effect, including deterrence as a wanted effect. And to not forget that the patrols should have a clear intended effect and measurable effectiveness criteria as opposite to asking for a particular asset. Here we have a representation of patrolling needs. And here we can see that RPAS is expected to play their role in order to achieve effective border situational awareness. Among other fixed wing, twin, single engine or rotary wings, RPAS are expected to contribute to improve the situational awareness over the land, among the coastline, in high seas and pre-frontier areas. I put here two categories of RPAS. It's difficult to use, actually there is no universe, or at least I haven't seen one single categorization of the RPAS. We put what is our understandings about the long-range RPAS, and here I would like also to clarify that Male RPAS for us is to be understood a platform 1 ton plus, and a small male RPAS is to be considered the one with the weight more than 500 kilograms. I have already mentioned that the border surveillance require platforms and sensors which are facing different challenges in different borders areas. But the main capability to detect, classify and track in support to the ground surface forces able to intercept in the most effective way. All these platforms and sensors are expected to be affordable available, reliable, and for us, most important is to be cost efficient. We do see, and we already saw, that there is room for other platforms, like RPAS. Here you have one amazing slide. We know, Frontex, what we pay currently for aerial surveillance services involving assets for small, light aircraft up to CASA or ATR. The manned aircrafts, one again, to be capable to detect, identify, and track. And we have to answer a few questions. Are the RPAS systems affordable, available, reliable, and cost efficient? Here you can see the scale from 100 euro up to 10,000 euros per flight hours. And I would like to make a remark. We know this price tags being in contact with the military, with industry, with other law enforcement authorities. And there is a companies very in a advanced stage, and when they are coming, they are bringing to us the price already given to the military. It's a very high price for us. From the other hand, we also aware about to the industry, which is in the development stage. And this part would expect us to pay to develop the system to the level of the advance. So this is a big challenge, a part of the insertions of RPAS into segregated airspace to us as well. Where we are and what we are doing. Since 2008, Frontex is actively working together with the member states, with the European Commission, and other European agency in the field of RPAS by conducting field tests, trials in a real operational environment or close to the border line. Here you may see just a few pictures taken from all these trials, a part of the more practical events organized and coordinated by Frontex. We do organize also workshops. At least 2 workshops have been, in fact 3, for for this period, where we invited the member states. Yep. Thank you. I will be giving opportunity to the regulators to express what is possible and what is not to the member states from the RPAS perspective. I would like to draw your attention that on the lines which are very down on the slides. Here you see the 3 categories of RPAS of main of interest from Frontex, which is the outcome from the study conducted by us in 2012 and later improved in 2014. So this is a mini-small RPAS for border surveillance. Actually, I wouldn't call it surveillance. It's as much more support given to the patrols. Vertical taking off and landing RPAS to extend the patrol vessel's horizon. And the most, for the time being, unexplored area for us in a more practical term is male RPAS. We are working hard, and soon we will have an open tender published, which will require male RPAS services for 2 types of platforms, which I already mentioned above. And the most important, we do have a budget approved for that. Once again, RPAS has its own potential to become a border surveillance tool. But it's new for law enforcement, it's new for border control, at least in Europe. RPAS are flown only by air forces or military. We do have interest on long range mail system, intermediate and long endurance, equipped with satellite communication, at least radar, camera, and AIS receiver. RPAS for land surveillance. Currently, EU member states are using them. All these mini and small below 25 kilograms are already in use. Of course, not in non-segregated airspace. Shortfalls for the bigger platform, segregation of the airspace, and here we are very much looking for any reaction from the regulator to have as soon as possible regulation which can accommodate insertion into civilian airspace. Frequency spectrum, civilian market offer, already mentioned, cost. For small one, it's limited to line of sight, use-free communication spectrum. I will not enter in details all this technical issue. I hope you're much more familiar than me. And my last slides, what we would like to achieve with the pilot we are going to conduct. With two words or with one, proof. Proof that RPAS systems are capable to address the border surveillance in the cost-efficient and operational effective way. This was all from my side, and we are very much welcome with the questions. Thank you.
Mr. Zdravko Kolev, Research Officer, Frontex European Border Coast Guard Agency. Very, very, very interesting to see how RPAS play an important part of wider surveillance strategy in Europe, but also what is expected from them, and not only to have an important role in mainly improving the situational awareness, but much more than that. The next speaker I would like to invite is Mr. Chuck Johnson, which is now the President and the CEO at Global Integrator of Unmanned Aircraft System and is representing NASA as the Senior Advisor for UAS integration. Mr. Johnson retired from NASA in October 2014 as a Senior Advisor for Unmanned and Autonomous Systems. Between 2010 and 2013, he was manager of the UAS integration in NAS project. Mr. Johnson's aviation career began as air traffic controller with the FAA for 11 years as a controller, supervisor, and manager. Mr. Johnson spent approximately 5 years in MIT Lincoln Labs doing human factors research between the FAA and NASA. He's a veteran of U.S. Army and has a bachelor degree in psychology from University of Colorado and an MBA from San Diego State University. Chuck, please join us.
Thank you. Thanks, Catalin. And Leslie, thanks very much, and ICAO for the opportunity to brief this great crowd on behalf of NASA. I'd like to talk a little bit about NASA's, there we go, about the differentiation at NASA between those that operate the high-altitude, long-endurance UAVs, some mid-size UAVs, and then those that operate some of the smaller ones. So at NASA, there's a pretty big discrepancy between what goes on the space side, which is about 80% of what NASA does, and then on science and aeronautics, which is a much smaller portion. So the space side doesn't get very much involved in UAS, only those that might be Mars landers, that type of work. But on the science side, they use a lot of unmanned aircraft in order to promote the science side of the house, investigating various aspects of things like hurricanes and fires, and so that's the side that it has the most operational expertise at the larger type aircraft. They really, the way the Science Mission Directorate looks at things, they can use satellites, they can use manned aircraft, or they can use unmanned aircraft, other types of assets. They choose the best platform based on the specific science mission that they're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those missions right now. Over the years, and you heard earlier, Brian Wynn talking about the fact that there are 30 or so active large wildfires right now in the U.S. Well, NASA does a lot of work in conjunction with the U.S. Forestry Service and with NOAA to look at aspects of how to fight these wildfires. And so a lot of the times they've deployed their assets. In particular, I'll talk about an aircraft called the Icana, which is a Predator-class vehicle that NASA's had for about 15 to 20 years. Thank you, General Atomics. That particular aircraft has been used a lot in fighting fires, flying over the various fires with active sensors, looking through whether during daylight or nighttime, looking through the smoke and haze, and being able to send imagery on a near real-time basis down to the Incident Command Center. So NASA's been doing this for many years, looking at many different aspects of firefighting, getting that information to the incident commanders in 10 minutes or less, and sometimes less than a minute, to actually be able to see where the hotspots are, providing some pretty significant benefits. So that's on the sort of the firefighting side. Another science mission that NASA's participated in is looking at the marginalized zone up in the Arctic Ocean, looking at how the ice has been eroding or increasing over time, depending on the time of year and the climatic conditions that go with it. NASA does a lot of work with satellites, and so what they've done in the past is they've looked at how an unmanned aircraft can collect data in real time to be able to assess the models that are being generated by the satellite inspection. So there's a large area of the Arctic Ocean that satellites have surveilled and looked at and made assessments and predictions of. And then in this particular mission, NASA went with a medium-sized UAV, about 250 pounds, up to the Arctic to be able to assess real-time what was actually happening and compare that against the models, and thus then be able to improve those models for future use. So it's a way to be able to use an unmanned aircraft to actually collect better data than they're getting from satellites in order to then change the models. The last one that I'll talk about from the science side is the Global Hawk missions that are flown over hurricanes, and there have been many of these over the past. You can see in the bottom right there's a number of different flight paths that have occurred over the years. You'll see, hopefully it's big enough to see, that's in some of those cases those routes have had to be somewhat circuitous, not really direct point to point, and that's a result of really of working with the FAA on designing a COA that would be acceptable from a safety standpoint. So there are challenges that go with this, even though NASA, as a public agency, can self-certify our own vehicles. But when it comes to the actual conduct of the mission and working through the COA, there are challenges that have to be worked with the FAA to ensure that the highest level of safety is adhered to. And I will say that the FAA has made significant progress over the last 5 years at least in working with NASA and with other public agencies in refining the COA process to make it much easier and much more acceptable to the missions that these agencies, especially NASA, are conducting. So that's been a real positive aspect of what's going on. On the aeronautics side, it's a little different. The Aeronautics Mission Directorate is looking more toward doing research in trying to get to UAS integration in the national airspace or in global airspace. And so a lot of the work that has been done has significant societal benefits, because what it will enable is everything from package delivery to urban air mobility, precision agriculture, et cetera. So looking at the broad aspects that really do help society in a way that only unmanned aircraft can. So the research that's been done, NASA's really got two main programs, UAS integration of the NAS, the project that I was in charge of, and then UTM, many of you know PK, I think he'll be here later this week to talk about UTM, which is going to be a big focus of the Friday-Saturday sessions. So I won't get into a lot of detail on UTM, but that's the other funded project under NASA. And then then NASA has a lot of other activities going on at the various aeronautics centers. NASA has 10 centers throughout the country, throughout the United States. 4 of them are aeronautics centers. One's at Ames, one's at Armstrong, which used to be called Dryden, which is on Edwards Air Force Base. One's in Cleveland, Glenn Research Center, and the other one is in Hampton, Virginia, Langley Research Center. So those aeronautics research centers do a lot of work with UAS, particularly small UAS. The U.S. integration of the NAS project is really designed to be, it was set up really as an effort for NASA to participate in developing research findings for our TCA Special Committee 228. So it was started back in 2010. It actually got funded in 2011, and the effort was to collect those research findings, particularly for DA and C2, and to some extent the human systems integration work that was done early on, to be able to inform the minimum operational performance standards for DA and C2, and ultimately get to the FAA the right data in order to make decisions on technical standard orders. So NASA's been involved in that from the inception. Really, if you go back to the days of Access 5 and our TCA Special Committee 203, NASA was then providing data mostly for MASPs at the time. But all that work has been done under this UAS integration project over the last, since 2011. And originally for the phase 1 part, many of you are familiar with this, it was really getting the aircraft to and from Class A, and then now for phase 2, it's aircraft that are going to interoperate, that are going to be lingering in Class D and E. So it's really a broad perspective. In this project, NASA intends in 2020 to have a systems integration and operationalization demonstration, and that demonstration will be a heavily joined by industry. There's a lot of information that'll be coming out in the next few months on what that's going to be, but the idea will be to start to really address some of the challenges, not just of DA and C2, but of full integration. So NASA's looking at a comprehensive strategy for full integration, not just on the regulatory policy and procedural side, or even the infrastructure side, or even the technology side where NASA has a focus, but then also looking at one of the bigger poles in the tent, in my opinion, which is the public acceptance standpoint, public trust. So that's the U.S. integration in the NAS project. UTM, I've got a couple of slides here. I'll talk just briefly about that because, again, that'll be the topic for the Friday, Saturday work. But as many of you know, NASA's UTM project looks at these technology capability levels. And one thing I will say is as those levels become more and more complex, the need to have proper training for the pilots is enhanced as we go forward. So that's really something that really needs to be addressed, and I think the community is looking at that, and I think some of the panels later are going to talk about that. Just one thing on this slide is that there have been a number of operations. There was over 100 in the first TCL1, and then there was 70 some odd in the TCL2. So there's been a lot of work going on, and then as I mentioned before, there's some work going on at some of the other centers. This is a depiction of the operations that are going on at Langley Research Center. There's a lot. They're on conducting operations on the order of 8 to 10 days a month now, and having about 40 or so operations per month. So quite a number of small U.S. operations in order to gather data, pretty significant amounts of data, some for UTM, but others for other types of research efforts that are going on. At NASA Armstrong, there's an effort going on, which is MMRTA, multi-monitor runtime assurance, and it's a way NASA's looking at how to get to a system that could be certified for fully autonomous vehicles. It's leveraged heavily on work that was done in the F-16 on ground collision avoidance systems, and that work that's being done at Armstrong looks at conducting some operations with small UAS and a small UAS test range, and then looking at the way they're developing an architecture which is a variable autonomous architecture that can be modified to include many things at the same time, looking at safety nets that would protect the system. A lot of the work that's come out of that has made its way into the standards organization of ASTM. This is the last slide talking about that, and that is, so NASA has been heavily engaged with standards organizations, RTCA, SC228 I mentioned, and the precursor SC203. So that work over the years has been done to get to MASP and MOPS for UAS, particularly for DA and C2. And then working under this MMRTA research to develop research findings that can help inform the standards community through ASTM, which is being led by Steve Cook, some of you know him out of Northrop, formerly of MITRE, and certainly heavy FAA participation, including Wes Ryan, who's here. So there's been a lot of work done there to try to get to an autonomous type system that would be certifiable. And then finally, the last thing that I'll mention is that through PK's work with UTM and through a Space Act agreement with the New York UAS test site, New Air, they're developing something called New Star, which is a way to go through a whole certification process. And I don't know whether or not, I know Ray Young is here, I don't know whether or not there's any, you probably are not presenting here, Ray, but if anyone wants to get a little more detail on that, they can go to Ray and talk to him about that. And that's all I have. Thanks very much.
Chuck Johnson, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing with us some of the projects, operations that NASA conducted and is conducting or running with RPAS and the challenges related with those operations and projects. And I'm sure if not immediately after, but in the next days, you will have a lot of questions and you will be stopped by the people here and asking a lot of questions. Moving forward, my next speaker is Mr. Ovais Ahmed. He's serving as Chief Aviation Safety Section in United Nations headquarters in New York City. Ovais is a military and commercial fixed-wing pilot by profession. He holds operational experience in remotely piloted aircraft and has been the first project manager of remote pilot aircraft system in United Nations. He's actively involved in the development of UN RPAS requirements, the acquisition process, and the oversight, operations, and safety in UN field missions. Ovais, please join us and share with us your experience.
Thank you, Dad. So many papers, UN bureaucracy, huh? Everybody's talking about it. Thank you very much. ICAO, thanks for the invite. Thank you for giving me 12 to 15 minutes to talk about and present what we are doing on behalf of our member states. And you represent your member states. And to some of you, thank you for staying awake at this time. Okay. Thinking of UN operations and RPAS, there's one word that comes to mind. What I did since last four and a half years in the UN with relation to RPAS, apart from the other work, the word complex come to my mind. It is the most complicated environment in which we operate without regulations, getting an operator from one country or one continent and taking them to another. Remember, we are not a state, we are not an operator. Imagine the challenge we have. So the type of operations we do are, of course, visual line of sight, beyond visual line of sight, of course, and that includes the satellite as well. We operate approximately at times 1,000 kilometers away, 12 hours over the target. So you can imagine the challenge. 24/7. We fly VFR, we fly IFR, we fly everywhere. And we do it on your behalf, remember. And the environment in which we operate, I'll just highlight few things. Always non-segregated. So once you see a 737 commercial making an approach, number 2 would be a Beech 1900, and the third one would be a UN RPAS. We are operating in that environment. If you see the picture underneath, we are sharing aerodromes, aprons on commercial airfields in some of the countries. Imagine the challenge. Apart from that, I will not talk about it, though it's not relevant. Security is a big challenge for us. Bad guys are coming in vehicles full of explosive, to hunt us down. Our operators are coming from the military and are coming from the commercial world. That's where you are involved. Very expensive, unregulated, learning at the cost of the money provided by your countries. Please help us. Now, all this RPAS effort of United Nations is not happening in isolation. It is part of a wider aviation effort. So the United Nations aviation comprises of manned and unmanned fleet, from bigger aircraft like 767 to smaller versions which are twin otter type, from specialized medevac, casevac to attack helicopters, specialized aircraft, and so on and so forth. In the absence of classifications, we did not wait. We developed our own classification because it had to be there to help us in acquisition of the services or acquisition of the product. So there are 3 basic classes what we have, and the open category which is fairly regulated now is part of our class 1. So if you see the weights, they are right in front of you, less than 150. And in that, we have micro, and in micro, you have your open category. Rest is class 2 and class 3, which is tactical, and class 3 is where the mail or the strategic ones can come in. This is our interim guidance till the time either we have something from ICAO or we formalize ours. I'm just flashing you the current fleet right now of United Nations. I would suggest don't take the pictures because they include the countries as well. Some of you are still doing it. I like it. I would do the same. This will continue to change. The fleet will change, countries will change, and our payload, which is the most important thing, which of course not part of symposium here, payload is the most important thing for us. Payload changes depending on the mandate of the mission. This is how they look like, some of them. They are painted in UN. If you go to the field, you will find them. Somewhere we are operating, somewhere we are visible, some places we are not. Again, we are doing it on your behalf. Now, the task. Our tasks are coming out for the RPAS from the overall mandate of the Security Council resolution, which is passed by member states, all of them, 193. That decides for each country, each field mission of United Nations, what we can do, what we cannot do, political objectives, military objectives. In case of military objectives, maybe information collection or humanitarian. Then we select what you hear from the previous speaker, the type of platform. Essentially, we divide our task into 2 categories: the peacekeeping and the humanitarian. The peacekeeping are very close to the military type operations, in which we do force protection, top cover, deterrence to the armed groups, track armed groups, surveillance, information collection. We don't do intelligence operations, information collection. Monitor terror groups, border smuggling, illegal mining. That's what we do. Battle damage assessments. This is what we do. At any point in time, we do not conduct intelligence operations. At any point in time, we do not conduct anything like command, SIGINT, ELINT. Those who are ex-military or military, you understand. On the humanitarian side, we do whatever is possible. Monitor lava eruptions, displacement of people because of earthquake, whatever you name it, we do it. We do logistics assessments, We do everything. GIS, mapping, help in search, in case if something goes down in our area where we are present, whether it's UN or non-UN. So this is what we do. Now, some of the challenges I would just quickly touch upon. And the first one is lack of standards. I will not go into the detail except highlight one thing where we are having a problem. There's a gap which is widening every second, and every second between the industry and the regulators. And at where we are, it is becoming an operational challenge to deliver. Oversight by the regulators. We have our operators coming from very developed countries, but the regulator is absent. And imagine UN is paying top dollars. There's another issue with the operations, and of course, because we are not talking about the payload, but the information collection, data collection, security, cyber security. The infrastructure for that is a huge challenge. The ground data terminals, the storage, the servers is a very, very big challenge. Its security is a very big challenge. The confidentiality and the storage of information is even a bigger issue. Imagine if our RPAS flies over a mass grave, captures the feed, and if it is not kept safe, secure, confidentially, it cannot be produced in international criminal court. People will walk away. Or if we pick up a feed of illegal arms in a country, and if the data is not confidential or is not secure, it will affect a lot of member states. Airspace. Since we operate with everybody, everywhere, there are issues. We operate in war-torn countries. We operate where there is commercial traffic. We operate where there is military traffic. We operate where there is humanitarian aviation traffic. And we operate where there is undeclared air traffic. These are the challenges somebody has to look into. RPAS operations are not so simple. Infrastructure. Now, due to variety of the RPAS, one are runway dependent, one are not. One are catapult launch, one are net recovery, one are runway recovered with an arrestor hook like F-14. It always creates a problem. Somebody was talking about NX-14 in the morning. We will need help in that as well. Training. This talk of mine is focusing on training. And I'm going to touch upon license and experience and how we suffered and how much is experimented by the commercial operators at the cost of the UN, which caused high accident rate and earned us bad reputation in the field. Just look at that. 2014 to 2017, I have removed the ATM incidents because of one reason. It will take away the focus from training. That's another big issue. We have classic cases. If you see training, there are 6 on the pie chart. And I will talk about licensing. One of the operator of ours provided for the same job a PPL, followed by CPL, followed by ATPL because of the number of accidents. There are no regulations. Regulator does not do anything. There is no guidance. Training. Because of lack of training, as proved in the investigations, runway excursions, they have stalled. Since they are not authorized to do flight testing in their country, they come in the UN operational area and train the pilots and crash them. Premature takeoffs. The best one was, after takeoff, the pilot in command wanted to switch the sensors on, inadvertently switched off the entire system, killing the system, crashing the bird. So what we did, we put in certain safeguards very, very quickly. Apart from following the ICAO 10019, we started looking into the theoretical knowledge. We started looking at certain number of hours because every state is different. And some of the states, there are no regulations. Some have come up with RPL, etc. If you have RPL, we don't bother. But in our acquisition process, if you don't have, then we see proof of ratings, we see at least CPL for single engine, etc., etc., to have some standardization and uniformity. We have another animal with us, the military pilots. They abide by the next national regulations, and you know what? They don't share. The last slide. Some of the mitigation actions in order to continue to operate, continue to deliver on the mandate, continue to save lives. We are developing our own UN regulatory framework as a short-term measure. And we will have our own classifications, our own concept of employment, operations, training, payloads, type of payloads, data collection, security, and cybersecurity. We will have that. Then we'll focus on operator responsibilities. This is what we have started doing that. In the absence of regulatory framework, this is the only way we can do that. We conduct risk analysis. We have developed SMS toolkits. We have, and what we have done, that we have created certain inspection checklists for the RPAS. That includes the vehicle itself, the station, the ground data terminals, and so on and so forth. We are also verifying the experience and the training of the operator this time. Are they able to handle the complex environment of the UN? We are also looking at, can they manage to operate in that airspace, non-segregated? Do they have the capacity to develop local operating procedures? We are forcing them to use transponders on bigger birds. We have no way out. There are no regulations. We are also coordinating with the host countries for safe corridors, slots, times, whatever we can in order to operate, continue to operate, because at times you can save an entire village if you can launch the bird at night, and this is very important. Last but not the least, we also had incidents of lost link, contributed to training, contributed to system redundancies. We also look into that. This is where I should stop. I think I have overshot it by 30 seconds. Sorry.
29.
29, sorry. So in case if you have any questions, I do not have a good news from UN, but what we need is your help. So thank you very much.
Mr. Ovais, thank you very much. And a part of that complexity of operations and difficult environment that the UN are operating in their missions every day, day and night, he mentioned several times, under not yet fully regulated environment or many times without any oversight, during peacekeeping and humanitarian missions is very important. But what I have noticed the most, 3 times Ovais asked us help, and we should not step up and give us our help. And this is why we recognize the ICAO here again, organizing this second symposium, is to help us, helping them, helping us, helping public, helping us to evolve. I think we are already warm up, and we are moving into my last speaker, but not the least, Mr. Brandon Suarez. Mr. Brandon is currently Technical Director for UAS Civil Airspace Integration for Aircraft System Business Unit of General Atomics Aeronautical System Incorporated, where he leads the company's efforts to integrate remotely pilot aircraft system into domestic, foreign, and international airspace. GASI manufactures, supports, and operates a variety of proven, reliable RPAS for military and commercial applications worldwide. In his current role, Mr. Suarez leads a multidisciplinary team working to solve the technical challenges associated with gaining unfettered access to civil airspace. He holds both bachelor and master degrees in aerospace engineering from MIT and is an instrument-rated private pilot. Brandon, please join us and share with us your wide experience.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this panel this afternoon and to see so many of you once again. I'm helping out as an advisor to the U.S. member on the RPAS panel, and so I'm here in Montreal quite often and working with many of you in this room, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Many people tend to focus on the explosion of small unmanned aircraft over the past couple of years, and rightfully so. It's actually incredible to me, even over the past decade, how it's taken off from sort of a garage hobby activity to really a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world. But if you zoom out and you look over the last 25 years or so, as I'm kind of showing on this chart, you see there's really been an explosion in large remotely piloted aircraft over that time frame. It's true that many of the 4 million flight hours that our aircraft have accumulated over the years have been under military applications, but countless hours have been under civilian applications, helping people and saving lives around the world. And we are now, it's safe to say, on the verge of bringing those 25 plus years of experience in large remotely piloted aircraft into the commercial world, which is why I'm so excited to be here for this event. A lot of our terminology has been clarified today, and a lot of the discussions have had a lot of things in common. So I really want to stress that this effort to integrate remotely piloted aircraft into the global aviation system is a global one. It's an international one. There are numerous CAAs, ANSPs, and standard development organizations around the world, and certainly from a manufacturer perspective, we are really honored to be a part of this effort. Since we have covered a lot of this already, I want to highlight in particular the standard development organizations that are doing a lot of the really heavy lifting and detailed technical work right now. And that includes RTCA, Special Committee 228, EuroK Working Group 105, and ISO TC 20. I can't take credit for actually creating this chart, although I think it is sort of a helpful illustration as we talk about operations for remotely piloted aircraft. As we're all well aware, the variety of RPA, the differentiations in size and speeds and payload capacities pretty much cover the full range that we can come up with in our imagination for operations. But in theory, I think that there is a correlation between the operational complexity that these aircraft undertake and the general expectation of safety that the public has. In other words, as operations become more complex and expose the public to greater risk, there will be a higher expectation of safety. And I think as we put all of the potential operations up on this chart somewhere, we see some groupings that start to emerge. Now, I'm not trying to suggest any sort of categorization scheme or any sort of naming convention, but in general, we have this idea that there are visual line of sight operations at low levels, there's beyond visual line of sight operations at low levels, and then we get up into sort of the medium and high altitudes where you can have low density and complexity all the way up to very high density and very high complexity. And all along that scale, I would suggest there's sort of a sliding metric in terms of four main performance requirements that fall out on these systems. The first being air traffic management, interaction, and interoperability. The second being communication, navigation, surveillance equipment. The third being control station requirements, and the fourth being the level of remote pilot control or engagement. So I'm going to focus mainly on the two on the right side for this talk. What we see a lot today, I would sort of characterize as medium-high altitude but low airspace density and complexity. And in this category, I would put things such as large cargo delivery. I'd put Class D terminal operations, especially in the United States. We have a lot of Class D terminal areas around small cities. And large area surveillance, similar to what's going on with the UN in Africa and other places around the world. Now, along these 4 scales from the previous chart, you can see that you sort of have breakpoints, and there are going to be particular things that fall out as requirements on these systems. And from a manufacturer perspective, I don't really want to start with a white sheet of paper. I really want to build off the decades of research and experience, operational experience, that's come out of the manned aviation world. So, for example, I'm not going to go through all of these, but as an example, on the control station side, engineers like to think in the past that we had this remotely piloted aircraft, we took the pilot out, we put him on the ground, and now we can completely rethink the way that the pilot interfaces with the aircraft. But what experience has told us over the past couple of decades is that there's actually very good reasons that general aviation cockpits look relatively similar now. There's very good reasons that glass cockpits and electronic displays take on similar styles, colors, and layouts. So from that perspective, as we look at these low complexity operations at high altitudes, we ought to take general aviation glass cockpits as a starting point for control stations, rather than an archaic thing of the past that should be left behind. Next, I'll talk about high density and high complexity airspace. In this category, you might put things like operations out of busy, large, complex aerodromes. Like in the United States, we have a lot of Class B airspace around our large cities, or continuous flights over metropolitan areas such as communication relays. Now in this case, I want to draw your attention not again to every category, but to something in particular that I think is useful for this particular loose grouping of operations. And that is leveraging existing communication, navigation, and surveillance performance requirements. Specifically, when you look at required navigation performance, there's the possibility there to use those concepts which have been codified at ICAO, which have been implemented at states for particular operations, but then we can expand those, we can extend those to enable new operations, more complex operations with maybe tighter navigation specifications. And that really starts to open up a whole new world of operations, because we've taken the language that everyone is used to speaking, we've taken the technology that everyone is used to in standards, and we've now adapted that for unmanned aviation and opened up and unlocked new applications. Now, of course, there are many ideas about what these RPAs will look like. Firstly, I would propose that tomorrow's RPAS that meets all of the requirements for international IFR operations may not look like today's RPAS. And as an RPAS manufacturer, I would be the first to admit that there are some things we're going to have to change. But having said that, there's also some new concepts that are being developed which are really exciting from a large RPAS perspective. Many of you have probably heard the announcement from Boeing that they plan to do their next eco-demonstrator flight test on a 777 and try to go gate to gate without the pilot touching anything. You've probably also seen some videos and press releases from DLR where they have a really interesting concept for an unmanned cargo helicopter. These are exciting advancements and things that, as an RPAS manufacturer, we are really excited about. So I mentioned earlier that we take some blame for the past mistakes that the industry has made, and I've mentioned that as an RPAS manufacturer with 4 million flight hours, we recognize that there are some things that will need to change going forward. And I think when we were here 2 or 3 years ago, we were starting down this road, but I'm excited to stand here today and show you a picture of what we think this future RPAS will look like that will really be capable of international IFR operations. This aircraft is the first prototype of a new aircraft that we call Sky Guardian. You can see it has an N number, it has an experimental airworthiness certification with the FAA, and it recently conducted a 48.2-hour flight test in the desert in Arizona. And you'll see certain features like on all-weather capability, anti-ice, de-ice to fly through weather, dual redundant line-of-sight data links, dual redundant SATCOM links, a detect and avoid system, and airworthiness that will meet an industry standard in STANAG 4671. But it's important to remember that an RPAS is not just an aircraft. So we've also redesigned our control station. And I talked a little bit about that idea of taking a general aviation glass cockpit and putting it on the ground, and that's exactly what we've tried to do. So after 10 and more years of trying to build a control station from the ground up to suit some of our military applications and military customers, we've taken a completely different look at it and thought about what it's going to take to fly IFR in some of the most complex airspaces around the world. So we've incorporated a flight management system through a Rockwell Collins ProLine Fusion glass cockpit. And we've leveraged ARINC 661, which is actually a really powerful tool for integrating that into the rest of the control station. I also want to stress and build off of what Chuck Johnson said earlier, that NASA's been doing a significant amount of research in this area. And really, this ability to do real-world testing is key to everything that we've been doing in the United States, and I think will happen internationally. This is a picture that was taken last summer. NASA's ICAO is on the bottom right on the screen, and it's surrounded by 5 manned aircraft that were involved in a month-long flight test campaign of a detect and avoid system on board ICAO. But most importantly, all of the data that was gathered during that flight test campaign and the results that came out of it went towards the verification and validation of technical standards that were being developed by RTCA Special Committee 228. So there's that strong feedback mechanism between the manufacturers, the researchers, the standard development organizations, all trying to tie it together to bring these capabilities into the real world. The one thing I would like to caution everyone as a manufacturer is to remind this group that aviation didn't come from the top down originally. It started with people testing things, trying new things, inventing new capabilities and technologies as we went along. And we didn't necessarily have the entire regulatory framework that we have in place today in the 1940s and 1950s when aviation was really getting off the ground. So I want to encourage everyone to let entrepreneurs be entrepreneurs, let inventors be inventors, let the manufacturers develop new technologies, new capabilities, and bring those forward as they're ready for standardization and for incorporation into regulations and policies. Really, we're excited because we think that ultimately what will happen as the aviation system evolves with unmanned aviation as an integral part of it is that manned aviation will become safer, more efficient, and more cost-effective, really opening up the global aviation system to more and more people around the world. So in conclusion, I would just like to highlight that there are RPAS operations going on around the world and in the United States 24/7 today, and we are really close to normalized commercial operations. We believe that IFR is going to be the way to safely and efficiently integrate remotely piloted aircraft in the global aviation system, and that things will evolve over time as we gain experience as a community. And of course, we want to keep the door open for new use cases and new operations that unmanned aircraft, especially large remotely piloted aircraft, will bring. So with that, I want to thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to engaging with you all over these next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Thank you for sharing with us the manufacturer point of view. And thank you for the forecast that you share and the possibility of emerging in the future the operations for the RPAS. And very interesting to listen, and I'm sure you will have questions during the week, not only today. Now, we are good in time. I think we have a little bit time to audience to ask you gentlemen some questions. And I have a few already on my display, and I would like to share one of those. So one of the questions, interesting question we have here is, what does autonomous operations look like in the NASA concept? And what are the capabilities here?
So, the A word, I guess I will get in trouble for using, but I think there are some in here that I know quite well that, like Mark Reed, where are you, that don't like that A word. But for autonomous operations, NASA's looking forward at, especially from an emerging aviation market perspective, things like in the end state, like urban air mobility. Many of the concepts that are coming out would be a fully autonomous vehicle that would actually carry passengers. And you heard even, I think Earl mentioned it in his opening remarks today, that could be the real wave of the future. So NASA's looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. As NASA starts to look at the way forward, NASA's been talking for a long time about trying to come up with some sort of a comprehensive or cohesive strategy for getting to fully autonomous systems. And so NASA's looked at it from a stepwise standpoint, for example, in commercial aircraft going from a crew to perhaps a single operator, and then ultimately to a fully autonomous capability. And looking at the things that are required to enable that from a technology standpoint, from a policy, procedure, regulatory standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, and then again from the public trust standpoint. So looking at those four pillars and looking at all the airspace enablers that would be required to get to a fully autonomous system. But there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of that work is going to be on the regulatory side. And so having the FAA as a partner is going to be absolutely critical. Having industry as a partner to do technology development, but then the FAA as a partner to be accepting of these new concepts. NASA's been, they just recently stood up a research transition team with the FAA for UAS integration, and we believe at NASA that will be the forum by which we can start to discuss how we get to fully autonomous flight.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Another good question I have for Brandon. How do you see lost link procedures being addressed under IFR operations?
Oh man, can I just defer to Mike Lazone? Is that okay? No. No. Our thought as a manufacturer, again, this is an area where we should probably confess our sins of the past in terms of being responsible for these silly orbits popping up in the middle of nowhere and climbing through flight levels. But our general approach in going forward is that under IFR, we'd like to try to mimic or follow the same procedures that are used for loss of voice communication. The biggest difference there, obviously, is that for when you lose voice communications and you get back into visual meteorological conditions, you find the nearest airport and you land and you fix the problem. In the case of remotely piloted aircraft that have lost the C2 link, we would probably want to continue on to the destination airport or our next filed or cleared point and hold there. So that's our general approach. There are some challenges, I would say. One of which is we're very supportive of the framework that ICAO has put in place in terms of remotely piloted aircraft and having a qualified, validated pilot in command. That's a really important concept for us. And we see there being a barrier internationally with very long flights where the pilot is not in control, which would happen if you'd lost the C2 link. And so we would be in favor of some limitation in terms of how long an aircraft could fly without an active data link. And what I think from a business perspective that will drive is more reliable and probably redundant links. And I would in general say that lost link in the future will be a very rare occurrence, because if it happens very often, then we just won't be allowed to fly.
Thank you very much, Brendan. One question to Ovais. Ovais, you were asking us for help, asking the aviation community. Where do you see UN operations from RPAS point of view in 5 years from now on, as a vision? And as a help to you, let's say.
Thanks. I suspect you are answering this question now. Okay. I can tell you what happened 5 years back. 5 years back, once the Undersecretary General of Peacekeeping Operations was invited to NYU in New York to give a talk on peacekeeping. So was nobody senior available except myself, so I accompanied him. And a question was asked about the novel technologies to be utilized for peacekeeping as force multipliers. Nobody spoke about drones over there. And eventually, once we came back, the discussion started on what all we can do. 5 years back, nobody thought that we are going to use the unmanned systems or RPAS. Today, we are having the most complex operations, what we are doing. 5 years from now, I can tell you, RPAS are here to stay. At this point in time, we are not having the armed versions. I don't know how your countries as member states decide in the next mandate, though there is a lot of negative publicity of the previous programs. But they're here to stay. They're helping us. I'll give a comparison. We have another platforms, manned platform for collection of information. Pilots, they have limited endurance, fatigued, fuel, limitations, weather. With the RPAS, you can take a little bit of chance. With the manned helicopter, a lot of limitations. So RPAS are here to stay. They are a force multiplier in our case. And how we can achieve 12 hours over the target with a manned aircraft. And once one bird is exiting the area, the other one is already getting in. So we believe that they're here to stay. That's why we are trying to develop our own interim piece so that we can do better acquisition and we can deliver better in the field.
Thank you, Ovais. I think that might be a little bit similar with you at Frontex, the same challenges you are facing, and what do you see the Europeans in 5 years from border surveillance point of view?
Well, indeed, this is a complex question, but complex questions to be answered with simple answers. Well, where we see the border surveillance, you know, the immigration flows are somehow unpredictable. It's like a balloon. You touch it here, they pop up there. What really need from technical point of view, easy deployable, reliable, cost-efficient system to accommodate the joint operations coordinated by Frontex, if I may say with few words.
Said it very well. Thank you very much. The next question, more or less for most of you, I would say, is coming from FAA, guys. So there have been several references to, and we are very good in aviation, as you all know, on acronyms. So let's see if the gentlemen, they see that they know the acronyms. So references to VLOS and BVLOS, okay? Can the panelists provide their perspective on the relevant criteria that distinguish between those two VLOS and VLOS operations? For example, if you can see the aircraft with your eyes but cannot determine its direction of flight, height above the ground, or aircraft attitude, are you really operating visual line or sight? Who wants to take the hit first?
Well, I have the microphone, so I guess I'll take a shot at it. And I'll sort of think about it from my perspective excuse me, as a previous air traffic controller. And while I worked at Los Angeles Terminal Radar Approach Control as a radar controller, I started my career as a controller in a small VFR tower in San Diego. And so from that standpoint, you may have, technically you could decide, a lawyer might be able to decide one thing. But from the standpoint of trying to detect and avoid another vehicle, if I can see the vehicle, that's more information than I have if I can't. So visual line of sight to me is if I can actually see the vehicle. Now for me to avoid that vehicle, as time goes on, maybe that vehicle is going to stay somewhat stationary. That's pretty easy to avoid. The only time it's less easy is if the vehicle is moving, in a direction that's going to be in conflict with you. But being able to actually see the vehicle is enough to me to be able to execute on a visual line of sight, detect and avoid, or sense and avoid. So that to me could be a way to be compliant with the federal aviation regulations that are associated with remaining well clear of an aircraft, 91-113, is if I can actually see the vehicle, then that's good enough for visual line of sight for me.
Yeah, I would say that if you have to ask the question, then you're probably no longer visual line of sight. But in general, I would add on a more technical level, there are experiments. The military does experiments to determine the visual acquisition range of an aircraft, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of people, but they're very systematic about it, very scientific about it, and they can come up with ranges at which probability of visual detection. And I think a lot of times our community is probably guilty of wanting to cut corners or not do all of the work that would be necessary to really prove systematically that something is true. And we tend to say, well, it has wings, it can fly, I should be able to go fly over there. And sometimes there's a little bit of the safety culture that has to come back in, and provide a reality check.
Thank you, Brandon. One more question I will take, and it's a continuation of this one in a way, and it's for Ovais. The question says that how does a UN flight in the shared airspace comply with the see and avoid requirement during BVLOS flights?
Okay. In case of BVLOS operations, the departures are basically from VFR. So VFR departures, and then they go into IMC and BVLOS operations. So prior coordination is done with the host countries. We do develop local operating procedures for safe lanes, altitudes, and then we do coordinate with air traffic controllers of the host country. And we marked areas on the map, and we give them names like NAI1, NAI2, NAI3, and these are the grids or lat longs. And there, once the bird goes in, it goes dark. The prior coordination is with the altitudes and with the area reference in terms of lat longs. So that's how they operate. It's a very wide area in which the commercial traffic has to abide by. Once the area is active by UN RPAS, they have to abide by certain limitations which are imposed by the air traffic controllers in that region. So that's what we do.
Thank you very much. I don't have any more questions from the audience, and I would like, being mindful with the time, to wrap up before having a coffee break, I expect. So we have listened what is going on a Frontex, on NASA, on UN, on a manufacturer, on atomic aeronautical systems. However, there are still a lot of questions we need together to answer, to find the right answers, and the key is collaboration. And I'm sure a lot of the ideas and what is going on in the industry today, from what you have seen from my distinguished guest, will be discussed even later on in the next panel, moderated by one of my friends, Vladimir. So thank you very much. I would like to give a round of applause to my distinguished guest, and thank you one more time.
Okay, before anybody leaves from up here, I have a couple things to take up. So first, as a show of hands, how many of you in the audience are regulators? Coming from the regulatory side of the house. All right, we have quite a few. How about those of you that might be operators? Operators of RPAS, UAS, drones. So we've got a few of you as well. Now, the next question is for the RPAS panel. Would anybody who participates in the RPAS panel actually stand up for a moment? There are quite a few of you here. So between the regulators and the industry, the operators, and all of you that participate in the panel, I think certainly here at ICAO, we've heard the request, the plea from Ovais on behalf of the UN to really work to expedite all of this and to do so in a very effective way. So we'll be doing our part here at ICAO. Regulators back in your states, the United Nations headquarters will be looking to all of you to equally work on all of this. So I also have one other detail. Coming back, 1600, 4 o'clock, we'll get resumed with our final session of the day to talk about the regulatory status. People that come back, so if you disappear, you do not get to participate in this. But for those of you that do come back, there will be a small raffle of a small art piece. So you are encouraged to go have a beverage and come back in by 4 o'clock. Thank you. And thanks again to the panels.